It is the year 1315. The sky over Europe has turned dark, not for a day, not for a week, but for months. Rain does not stop. Fields turn into mud. Crops rot before they can grow. In small villages, mothers stare at the empty bowls. Children cry through the night, not because they are sick, but because they are starving. There is no electricity, no machines, no food imports when the harvest fails. There is nothing left. This was not a war. This was not a plague. This was something slower, something crueler. This was the Great Famine. Tonight, we are traveling back more than 700 years. In 1315, Europe was not prepared for what was coming. The medieval world depended entirely on agriculture. Nearly 90% of the population were peasants who worked the land. Their survival depended on warm summers and predictable seasons. But suddenly, the weather changed. Beginning in the spring of 1315, relentless rainfall struck northern Europe. England, France, the Low Countries, Germany, and parts of Scandinavia were hit hardest. The rain was cold and continuous. It soaked the soil until farmland became useless mud. Wheat and barley rotted in the fields. Hay could not dry properly, which meant animals had little winter feed. Even stored grain began to spoil due to damp conditions. Modern historians link this disaster to the beginning phase of the Little Ice Age, a period of long-term cooling that affected Europe for centuries. Temperatures dropped just enough to shorten growing seasons. Crops needed warmth to mature, but the sun rarely appeared. The worst part? Medieval people had no scientific understanding of climate. They could not explain what was happening. Many believed it was divine punishment. When the 1315 harvest failed, people hoped 1316 would bring relief. Instead, 1316 was even worse, and by then, Europe was already starving. At first, families relied on stored grain from previous harvests, but medieval storage methods were basic. Food did not last long. As supplies ran low, prices began to rise rapidly. Records from England show that grain prices doubled and even tripled. In some areas, for poor families, bread, the most basic food, became unaffordable. When the food ran out, people made desperate choices. They ate wild roots and forest plants. Tree bark, acorns normally fed to pigs. Nettles and weeds farm animals were slaughtered early, even though they were needed for farming. Oxen used for plowing were killed for meat. This decision solved short-term hunger, but destroyed long-term agricultural recovery. Horses disappeared. Dogs vanished from villages. Cats were eaten in some regions. Milk production collapsed because cows were weak and underfed. In cities, food riots broke out. Markets became chaotic.
Give me that grain, it's mine! Let go, you fool! My children are starving!
Stop!
Theft
He stole my
increased
milk!
sharply.
Get back here, you rogue!
Parents struggled to feed children.
God help us, Elara. It is not enough.
Malnutrition spread everywhere. People were not just hungry, they were slowly wasting away. Exact numbers are impossible to calculate, but historians estimate that 10% to 15% of Europe's population died during the famine years. In some local regions, death rates were much higher. Children were especially vulnerable. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. Elderly people could not survive long without food. Disease spread quickly among starving communities. Chronic hunger caused extreme weight loss, weakness and exhaustion, increased vulnerability to infections, lower fertility rates in some areas. Crime rose because desperate people stole food. Law and order weakened. Even royal families were affected. Historical records show that King Edward II of England struggled to find bread for his own household during the worst year.
Is this truly all the bread we have left?
Forgive us, your grace. The stores are empty.
This famine did not kill as many people as the Black Death later would, but it weakened Europe physically and psychologically. It created a fragile population, and that fragility would have deadly consequences in the decades ahead. This is one of the most disturbing parts of the famine. Medieval chroniclers recorded horrifying stories. Some accounts describe parents abandoning children because they could not feed them. There are references to prisoners being starved to death. There are also written claims of cannibalism in extreme cases. However, historians debate how common these acts were. Some reports may have been exaggerated to show the horror of the time. But we do know this: hunger destroys social boundaries. When survival is threatened, people make choices they would never imagine during normal times, even if cannibalism was rare. The fact that such stories were recorded shows how deep the desperation had become. This famine was not just about food shortages. It was about fear, collapse of moral order, and the breakdown of trust within communities. The Great Famine changed Europe in powerful ways. First, it shattered confidence in leadership. Kings and nobles were expected to protect their people, but they had no control over the weather. Many citizens questioned authority. Second, agriculture took years to recover, with so many farm animals slaughtered and seeds eaten. Fields could not be replanted properly. Third, the population remained physically weak for decades. So when the Black Death arrived in 1347, Europe was already vulnerable. Some historians believe the famine made the plague even more deadly because people's immune systems had already been weakened by years of poor nutrition. The famine also marked the beginning of the end of medieval stability. The 14th century became one of the darkest centuries in European history, marked by hunger, plague, war, and economic crisis. The Great Famine was not just a disaster. It was a warning, a reminder that even powerful civilizations can collapse when nature turns against them. The rains finally stopped, but the damage was done. Fields lay barren, homes abandoned, and villages once full of life were now silent, haunted by hunger and loss. Those who survived were forever changed, weak from starvation, facing a harsh world where every meal was a battle and every day a struggle. Desperation pushed humanity to its limits. Stealing, violence, and acts once unthinkable became a grim reality, shaking the very soul of Europe. Fear and grief lingered long after the last failed harvest, as generations grew up knowing hunger, whispering stories of starving children and empty bowls. The famine weakened the continent, leaving it vulnerable to the catastrophes that followed. The Black Death, war, and social upheaval, striking even harder because the people were already fragile. The Great Famine stands as a stark reminder that nature can never be ignored, that civilization may appear strong but is fragile when disaster strikes, and that even in the darkest times, human resilience endures as both warning and memory of survival amidst despair.
This was the Great Famine, from 1315 to 1327, when Europe was brought to its knees. The Great Famine was not just a tragedy of food. It was a tragedy of humanity.